Hello, my name is Kim Davenport, and I am the Communications Manager for Tacoma Historical Society. And it is my great honor to have with me today State Representative and Speaker of the Washington State House, Representative Laurie Jinkins. Thank you for being with me today, Laurie.
It's great to be with you, Kim.
So we are hosting this as one of our virtual programs in part in honor of our current exhibit, which celebrates LGBTQ history in Tacoma. And that led me to want to have a conversation with you. And I wanted to just start with a really simple, open-ended question for you, which is, how long have you called Tacoma home, and what brought you here, and then what has led you to stay here?
Well, first of all, Kim, I just wanted to say I just visited the exhibit, and it was thrilling to exhibit it or to be at the exhibit. And it was also really awesome to have the sticky notes. And it teaches me, I guess, that I have been around a while, because I added many sticky notes to things, adding in some different information. So it was great to be able to feel like I was contributing to rounding out, historical information about the community. I moved out here in August of 1987, arrived on August 7th of 1987, moved from the Midwest, from southwestern Wisconsin, drove cross country with my two sisters, who were both younger than me, came out here to go to law school at what was then the University of Puget Sound School of Law, since has been sold to Seattle University, so is up at Seattle University now. But I actually chose Tacoma to move to I was not a well-traveled person at all. I grew up in rural southwestern Wisconsin, moved 45 miles to go to college to the big city of Madison, which was a big city, and very few people from my high school had ever gone that far to college. But I had a friend, I thought that I'd gotten a bachelor's and master's degree from Madison. And I thought, if you go to law school here, you're never leaving. And if you go to law school somewhere else, you can always come back, but you should maybe try something else. So then I went on a search talking to friends who'd traveled. And one of my friends told me, I said, if you could live anywhere in the US, where would you live? And she said, the Puget Sound. I said, what's that? And then she described the region, and I applied to law schools in the Northwest, and met the admissions director of the University of Puget Sound Law School, who had come back to the Madison campus, and who's now a longtime 30-year friend. But she seemed like the nicest of all the admissions directors to me. So that's how I ended up in Tacoma without ever having visited here.
Wow. And it's like so many stories I run into of people who come to Tacoma from somewhere else. I imagine, did you fall in love with the natural beauty of the area as well? Or what were some of the other things that led you to decide to stay? Because like you said, you could have gone back, right? You could have gone back to the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a good question. It just seemed like in an evolutionary way, the right thing to do. I mean, part of it was, I met my wife in law school, and she grew up in Puyallup, right? So she had family here. And I guess I just felt like I had moved on, but there is nothing like waking up in the morning, and I lived in the Stadium District at first, and either walking down the hill, the law school was in the Old Roads department store, which is down by right next to Leroy Jewelers, in downtown Tacoma, and either walking down St. Helens or driving down St. Helens, and on a clear day, just seeing Mount Rainier rise up in front of you. I actually have a friend from the Midwest who came out to visit, and she flew in late at night, and she was going to go she was in PA school, and she was going to study in the law school while I was going to classes in the morning. And so we drove down, and we're driving down the hill, and I'll never forget her starting to scream, and I slammed on the brakes, said, what's the matter? She's like, it's a mountain, it's a mountain. So that was it. I guess I never felt like I made this permanent decision exactly to stay. I just did.
It just happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I choose the mountain for, I guess it's here behind me,
Yeah.
the backdrop. I mean, it's really I have read, honestly, so many stories of people who started their life somewhere else and came out here for some reason, the military sometimes, and just decided to stay because it was
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
welcoming and beautiful.
One thing I will add, about just about my decision, which I think probably did have a long-term impact. I'm not really quite sure why, but as I was driving out with my sisters, I had a lot of time to think. Neither one of them, well, only one of them had a driver's license. So anyway, I had a lot of time to think while I was driving. And one of the very conscious decisions I made in 1987 is that, I had been in the closet through college in my master's program, and that when I moved out here, I would no longer be in the closet ever again in my life. And I really had some, thought through some pretty strong feelings about secrets and how damaging secrets are to a person's psyche. And I just felt like the secrets I'd been carrying were harmful to me. So that was that I think, that was probably a major reason for staying too, is that I was in a place where I'd lived an out life and I'd had a really good experience in law school, and I wanted to keep having it.
Yeah. Fresh start in a new place
Yeah.
with a new outlook. Absolutely. Yeah. So I know that many people who will watch this will recognize you as a longtime leader in our community. And I'm always curious to know this. What led you to decide to run for office the first time you did? What first got you into that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually being involved in gay rights is the thing that got me involved in politics. I felt very drawn to the issues, and like right out of law school, we had a ballot initiative on the ballot here in Tacoma, and I got somewhat involved with that campaign, but even much more involved the next year. And so I spent 20 years involved in issues, political issues, less like party things, but really for me, there were a few things that happened. One, I'd taken a job back in Tacoma. I'd been working for state government in Olympia at a high level job, but I was driving out of my community every day. That took a lot of time, and I just didn't have a lot of capacity. But then when I started working here in Tacoma, I had a job where I had some feeling like I had some extra capacity, as well as I didn't have all this travel time. So anyway, there was more time. I had served on a lot of nonprofit boards over my 20 years in the community at that point, and I was starting to get asked to rejoin them. And I thought that I really still love all those organizations, but I felt like I needed to really make a decision. Is that kind of what I was going to do, or was I going to do something else? And then it was also really clear that marriage equality was coming, and that there was a lot of work to do. There'd never been an out lesbian serving in the state legislature. And I felt really like, I looked around, there were no out lesbians who likely were going to be serving in the legislature. And that was very personally motivational to me. But we were also in a big recession. And I felt like my experience in state government could help people. And so that it just made me, I hadn't really considered it for a long time. I think the first time I really thought about running for the House, and when my announcement to run, there was a 3-week window from my first serious thought about it to announcing I was going to run.
It's amazing to me to think about that, because I know some people potentially think about it from the time they're really young. Oh, I want to be a politician, but it sounds like it was a natural evolution, but also that it was a pretty quick decision, really.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so that I do think it's, for me, the first time in my life I would ever say I felt called to something. And I was just, it presented itself. And then I decided that if I was going to do it, I was going to be all in. And so I was. So anyway, I've only ever run for one office. I just run for it over and over again till I get it all perfect.
Right.
And actually, for me, different people have different feelings, but the minute I stepped foot in the House of Representatives, I knew it was my home, and I knew that there was no other office, there was no other place I ever wanted to serve.
So you've always represented the same district?
At the same district. I mean, it's the right after my first election was redistricting, and then we just did another 10-year redistricting, so it changes a little bit. But I've represented the 27th legislative district, which is most of the city of Tacoma, for my entire political career, and I've loved it. It's been the best job I've ever had.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned a ballot initiative. You mentioned a political sort of campaign that first got you into thinking about this work initially of, and I've talked to you about this before, but in conjunction with our exhibit, I'd really love to delve into this a little bit more. If I have this right, it was late 90s, early 2000s that both in Tacoma and at the state level, there were discussions about including the LGBTQ community in anti-discrimination laws that were on the books. Can you talk more about what those efforts were and what the process was and how much of a struggle it was to get things passed?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to not talk too awfully long about this, but you know, in the 80s, there were many cities that were advancing anti-discrimination laws for LGBTQ people. And then a woman named Anita Bryant, who'd been a former Miss America and, you know, was on advertising for Florida orange juice, very right wing, took up a cause to repeal those laws. And they started to be repealed all over the nation. It ended up in the very late 80s. The city of Seattle was the first city that rejected one of those Anita Bryant initiatives and maintained their law. In 1989, the City of Tacoma Council passed protections for lesbian and gay people at that time. And there was immediately a repeal effort in 89. And I wasn't very much a part of that campaign. I was still in law school at the time. So I wasn't very involved. I was living in Tacoma, but we lost that election by around 800 votes, a very small margin. And we really thought that a lot of us thought that the reason was that people were confused. And that because it was a very confusing ballot initiative, that was also a time when the way in which people ran these campaigns was not to talk about lesbian and gay people. It was to talk about other people that they might feel more comfortable with that would be negatively affected if these laws were repealed. It was a real strange, I mean, I look back, it was a really strange environment because we were in a lot of ways still expected to be very closeted. And so anyway, we gathered signatures. I became part of the campaign that gathered signatures to get us back on the ballot in 1990, to get the law back on the books, and became kind of a spokesperson and one of the core team that worked on this campaign. It turned out that people were really confused. And on election night, we lost by 70% to 30%. And that was one of the more devastating losses I've ever experienced. And, you know, for people who were just coming out, it really drove many people in Tacoma back into the closet. It took a long time for people to heal from that.
So what was the next step then? You know, coming back from a defeat like that, what's the next step in that process?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's this huge context of what was happening in the rest of this, all over Washington state. There was this guy in Oregon named Lon Mabon who was getting ballot initiatives on the Oregon ballot, statewide initiatives to write discrimination into the law. And he announced that he was going to bring his campaigns to Washington, and a group of people got together and said, no, that's not going to happen. You'll keep your hands off Washington. It became the first real statewide LGBTQ organization called Hands Off Washington. We in Tacoma, that would have been in about 93. So a couple years go by. That was in 93. we started organizing, and one of the big things that Hands Off Washington did is there was a recognition that Seattle already had a very strong and empowered LGBTQ community that had been protected in many ways, that it was the rest of the state that we were not well organized in. So rather than spending energy organizing in Seattle, I joined the board of Hands Off Washington, and we spent all of our energy organizing everywhere but Seattle. And we had chapters all over the state. We had one here in Pierce County. And so we spent actually most of the 90s battling back against anti-gay initiatives. None of them made the ballot ever. And we developed such great, strong allies in the faith community, in the business community, in the law enforcement community, parents and friends, and just it was an amazing time of real growth and affirmation. And it was also the time when we started to realize that the most personal thing any of us would ever do also happened to be the most political thing we could ever do, which was to come out. And then in the late 90s, I was chairing the Hands Off Washington board, and we decided to do a proactive initiative to write anti-discrimination protections into Washington state law. First time there'd ever been a proactive ballot initiative on this issue, or really in a lot of ways to extend a civil right to a community. There was a lot of dissension in the community about whether or not that was appropriate to put the extension of rights up to a vote of the people. And we had excellent polling that showed people's about 80, actually in the low 80s, people thought it was wrong to fire somebody from their job because they were gay. But the biggest challenge was people thought it was already illegal. They could not believe that it wasn't already illegal. So this played into, for folks who were around then, you might remember the special rights argument. It really played into the special rights argument because people thought, that's wrong. You can't do that. That's not okay. It's illegal. So they must be trying to get something else. And the truth of the matter was, it was wrong. It wasn't illegal. And we had, and the thing I learned about that campaign, Kim, was that our community was not really strongly aligned about it. A lot of different feelings about it, and that kept us from really being able to forcefully get out into the electorate and talk to them about the issue. And we lost really quite badly. And so again, I was part of one of these proactive things twice, have had experience with loss, which again, I probably learned more from those experiences than from the wins we had in ways. But that was hard. And that's what led us to finally getting protections here in Tacoma in the early 2000s.
So it's an amazing journey. And I think it's especially important, this is more than 20 years ago now. There's a whole generation of people born after this happens, right? And so I think it's important for people to realize how recent all this history really is.
Yeah.
Like the protections that are in the law now, they haven't been there very long.
Yeah, well, right. And then, and then I think it was 2002 when we had our Tacoma United for Fairness campaign, TOUGH, was the name of the group. But we again, and this was another time where we had a Tacoma Human Rights Commissioner who was working on having the council add LGBTQ people back into the anti-discrimination laws. This was also, the earlier versions had been really lesbian and gay folks, not really including trans folks. We were very clear about including trans folks in the 2002 campaign. But this human rights commissioner was kind of out there on her own. No one was really talking to her very much. And then before we knew it, like the commission had recommended to the council, and I got a call from some staff at the city saying, what the heck, we got to do some things. Can you help us? So, we really structured it with much more community engagement before the council ever even voted on the ordinance. We did a whole bunch of community forums to talk about the issue, to explain the issue to people, to answer questions. That was helpful. The council adopted it. We did have a group that that collected signatures to try to repeal it. And we just had the most, uh, I think, the most robust campaign the city of Tacoma certainly had ever had up to that point, and maybe has ever had. We organized we understood at that point that being out was the most powerful thing that you could do, that people having friends that they could look at and family members and coworkers who they knew were lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, and they also knew all kinds of other things about them that made them a friend, right? That was important. We went door knocking, door to door, and had multiple days where we would have over 100 people show up to door knocks, tons of allies doing this with us. The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force came out and really helped us in the campaign, helped us, get a victory. And in the end, we won by a 57% vote. And that was at that point, it was the largest margin that any city had ever retained its anti-discrimination ordinance by. And maybe other cities have done it by larger margins since then, but up to that point, we were it. And I met many lifelong friends doing that, and brought many, lifelong friends, or at least since I'd moved out here, to that campaign. But I was really happy to be able to chair that and to use those losses. Things that had happened during those losses taught me a lot about what to do and not to do in order to get victory in the early 2000s. Very proud of my city for it.
It's a wonderful part of Tacoma history for people to understand, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I just don't feel like there aren't that many times in anybody's life, some people don't have any, where you get to remake history, you get to revisit this awful history that you have in 1989 and 1990, this devastating thing that happened, and then, less than 15 years later, you get to take that history and you get to completely transform it and remake it in this wonderful way for people. For me, I could do it for myself and for our entire community and city.
And speaking of making history, that leads me really nicely to my next question, because I wanted to ask you about, when you were first elected to the legislature, you became the first out lesbian to serve. And then years later, coming into the role of Speaker of the House, the first woman to hold that role, and not to mention, also the first LGBTQ person to hold that role. But I'd like to ask you kind of two questions, and you can take them in any order that you want. But what's significant about those firsts to you personally? And then also, what do you think is significant about them more broadly? Like maybe, to our district that you serve, or in Tacoma, or statewide, what do you think is significant?
I mean, the personal thing that's significant to me is being the first queer woman elected to the legislature. That was very important to me in my campaign, in the sense that it got me up every day. So right, the campaign is really always about talking to voters and raising money so that you can talk to voters that you actually don't physically get to talk to, right? So you can send them mail or do advertising or something like that. And there are a lot of days where you wake up and you're just like, I do not feel like doing that. It's raining, or, any number of things. And, I would be able to say to myself, do you want to be the first or don't you? Your choice, Laurie. And then I would get up and I would go do it. So that was important. That is an important motivational thing for me. But other than that, it doesn't feel like it's about me at all. It's about the symbol of that thing. I can't even tell you, Kim, the number of people when I was elected, the letters I received, the emails I received from young people, from older people, from all sorts of people all over the state who talked about how happy it made them to be able to see some reflection of them. And then when I would, give speeches on the floor and talk about my family, people who would say, my family's never been spoken of on the floor of the House of Representatives. Never, never. And you talked about my family. And pictures of my wife and I and our son and things like that. And that I tend to look at that as not really about me or about us, but it's about us, bigger us. And that's the same way I feel about the speaker role, being the first woman. And I may or may not be the first LGBTQ person. I'm certainly the first lesbian. We've had all men before. I don't know if any of them were gay. They weren't out, but if they were, and I have not, no one's told me a story in which people think we've had prior gay male speakers. But anyway, I'm very honored to be able to be the person one of the people that gives people hope and helps people feel included and seen. And I do think, coming from the community that I've come from, I have a particular commitment to inclusion of diverse voices around decision-making tables, because I know what it's like to not have my voice heard around a decision-making table, or the queer community's voice heard, and to have other people making decisions for us. That's it's a very important thing to me. And I feel strongly that sometimes that makes our decision making more complicated, right? Because you're listening to a lot more diverse voices to try and make a decision. But that's okay, because every single time the decision that's made for the people of this state is better. It's better. So anyway, I'm a little bit on my soapbox.
No, I love that soapbox.
Yeah.
We talk about having a representative government, right? But if it's actually not representative, are we really achieving that? So it's really important. I have one more question, and then we have time if there's anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to talk about as well. But I have a question that I love to ask pretty much everybody I talk to in this venue, which is, why do you think it's important? I know you do, because we've talked about this before, but why do you think it's important that people in a community know the history of their community in which they live? Why do you think that is a value of a community? What does it do to improve a community? Why is it important for individuals? In other words, why do you think people should come to our museum and see our exhibit?
Well, I think, there's a whole bunch of reasons. I hope for people, I hope that seeing the struggle that folks have gone through to get us where we're at today is one, like, it's humbling, right? It's really humbling to see what others have done. And for me to actually know Jim Gaylord, right? Who's a personal hero, to have known Perry Watkins, who's was a total kick in the pants, and he would tell you what to do and where to go and how quickly to get there. That is humbling, but sometimes in times like this that we're in, that can seem very difficult for me, and I think for a lot of other people, seeing that other people went through difficult times and came out of those and found creative, inspiring ways to move out of it and to help broaden their influence and their impact on community. That's just so inspiring to me. Like every time I go and see a historical exhibit, those are things that I think about, is the amazing things that people did. And then, hey, their life was at least as hard as what's going on for me right now, or harder. And they figured out things to do, and we can learn lessons from them. One of the things I mentioned before we started this interview, The other thing that's kind of funny being in the legislature is I remember being a new member, and I sat next to two of the most senior members on the floor, Eileen Cody and Ruth Kagi, both of whom had served for nearly 20 years before I arrived. And two things that were fun and interesting about it. One would be every once in a while, I would say to one of them, I'm going to do a bill about this. And inevitably, one of them would say to me, I did that bill in 1998, and I'm going to tell you what happened. And this is what's going to happen to you. And the thing about it was, like, sometimes exactly what had happened to them would happen to me. But many times had changed, right? Things had changed and the bill would move. And they would always be happy for me. But that to me, that's a little bit about historical learning too, is like, oh, hearing from them what happened when they ran the bill was always really important. But you also have to realize that times change, and that's part of what happened between 1990 and 2002 in Tacoma. We helped make those times change too, right? And the other thing is just the great thing about history and learning from people who've been through historical times is there's no end to learning. Like, you can talk to when I talked to Ruth and Eileen, most of the times they were giving me advice, but these were 20-year members who would come to me sometimes and say, I don't know what to do. Here's what happened. What do you think I should do? And I'm like, I'm a freshman. I don't know. Maybe do this. And every once in a while, one of them would say, that's an awesome idea. I'm going to try that. And it would work. Right. And so the great thing about history is to be able to evolve and learn and always be learning, and never stop learning, because it teaches you how to move the world forward. So I may be off on a bunny trail, but anyway.
No, I really appreciate that answer. Thank you. And I want to come back to something that you said early on, and I knew what you meant, but I want to make sure everybody else understands what you meant. You talked about coming to see our exhibit and adding Post-its. Can you help me share with anyone watching, maybe who hasn't come into the exhibit yet, what you meant by that? What's the significance of the Post-it notes in our exhibit?
Well, it's this great exhibit on LGBTQ history in Tacoma. And it invites people who are looking at the exhibit to take Post-it notes, and it has pencils there, and write additional information, names of people, things that happened, correcting dates, whatnot, all kinds of things, to better round out our history. So I really, really urge people to go to it, especially folks who've been around the community for a long time. You may have things to add. We were just talking, Kim, about there's some information about, like, the history of bars in Tacoma, but my guess is there's a whole bunch of people that could tell you about all kinds of, bars, the 733 Club, the Polar Bear, the airport, there's a whole bunch of historic bars, none of which exist anymore as LGBTQ bars in Tacoma. But that's just a fun, like, sub part of the history. We could probably get people from hopefully somebody from the court of Tacoma will see this, and we'll have, maybe the court should actually go down as a group and start posting Post-it notes about all kinds of great things about the court subculture and the contributions it's made to all kinds of things in our community. So anyway, people have the chance to build out history, our historical queer timeline in Tacoma themselves.
Yeah, it's a wonderful part of the exhibit, I think, and it's and of course the Post-its are in a rainbow of colors, because they should be. But I just think it's a great gesture of acknowledging that we certainly in the museum do not have the full picture, but nor do I think we ever have the full picture on any topic unless we invite lots of people to contribute. So yes, I hope everybody comes and sees it.
I think I've told you, Kim, other times when I've talked to you, the State History Museum collects my papers.
Yes.
So, I mean, I have no idea what kind of loaning uh, arrangement you all have, but for example, I know there's at least one Tacoma United for Fairness yard sign at the History Museum. There may be more, and T-shirts and other things like that. So as you continue to build, hopefully the History Museum would be interested in loaning the Tacoma Historical Society some of the items
Yeah,
for
thank you. Yeah,
display.
and
Yeah.
this is, to my knowledge, our first exhibit specifically on this topic,
Mhm.
and I know it will not be our last. So it's good to know that all those materials are there, and we can include them the next time. In addition to all of the information being shared by people who add those post-its when they come visit.
Yeah.
So yeah, is there anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to add?
I guess there's a whole bunch of things that make me proud about Tacoma, right? We've had a number of out LGBTQ people elected to office, leading organizations. We have two colleges in Tacoma who are led by gay Black men, and both are doing extraordinary jobs doing that. We are just so the LGBTQ community is so fully engaged with the success of Tacoma, fully, in so many ways. And I really I want our community to be so proud of that. Not only do we support each other, but we are all about having the whole community rise, all of us together, and helping everyone be successful. And I am so proud to be a member of the community, and the Tacoma community and the LGBTQ community within Tacoma that has been so committed for so long to making sure Tacoma is a successful place to live and to work and to play.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to give you the last word on that. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time. And I will, as this video comes to an end, I'll put up the information on the screen about how people can come see the exhibit. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
And thank you, Kim, for all your work on the exhibit. It's just really wonderful. I loved it.
This is a Tacoma Historical Society production.